Hi guys, Dwight here, and today I'm going to take a break from our budget deck list series because I want to talk about a card that I think is increasingly becoming a problem in Duelyst, and as I'm sure you've seen other people complain about, or you can imagine, I'm going to talk about Keeper of the Vale. So this has been on my mind for a while, but I got into a discussion on Twitter yesterday with a couple of other players who agree with me that it's just wildly disproportional to the amount of power that should be in a card, especially when you compare it to the other available options. So if we start with its stat line, it's a 4-5, which is comparable to pretty much every other 5-drop that is available, aside from the golems, which are obviously just balls of stats with no extra effect available to them. And so obviously it's going to take a knock in statistics for that, but the opening gambit that it has is so massively powerful compared to anything else in the game that this far outweighs any kind of statistical damage that you could do to the body itself. So there are two close comparisons to Keeper of the Vale in Duelyst. The first of these is Dancing Blades, which many players would consider a perfectly serviceable and even a very good 5-drop, and as you probably know, this is a minion that does 3 damage to a minion in front of it as its opening gambit and has a 4-6 body. So it's perfectly good at removing something and playing a decently big minion onto the board, but in terms of value, its effect is only more valuable than Keeper of the Vale in very, very niche circumstances. The other 5-drop we would look at is the Abyssian class card, which is Reaper of the Nine Moons, and this card has the dying wish of it will spawn a random minion from your enemy's deck in the place where it dies. So first of all, it has similar statistics. It's 5-4 with flying, so it's slightly more aggressive in that sense. The problem with it being a dying wish instead of an opening gambit is that it can obviously be silenced, and because it's pulling a minion from your enemy's deck, that minion could be unsynergistic with your own deck for a start. It's also more likely to be a low-end drop, with everyone creating decks based around 9, 10, 2-drops and a couple of other low utility drops as well. And because it's pulling from the deck as opposed to pulling from cards that have already died, like Keeper of the Vale, then this puts us in a situation where, like I say, you're more likely to draw into those because there's more of them. So it's going to spawn one of those as opposed to something high quality in 90% of circumstances. So Keeper of the Vale's opening gambit itself is when you play the minion on any space nearby where you play the keeper, you can spawn a random minion of yours that has already died onto that space. So first of all, I think it's a problem that you can choose where you spawn the minion, because this creates a positional advantage that you wouldn't have otherwise. I also think it's ludicrous that it can spawn any minion at all as opposed to having a cap on the potential value of that minion. So if we look at best case and worst case scenarios, because Keeper can't spawn a token that has died, in all likelihood, if you look at the makeup of decks at the moment, the Keeper is probably going to spawn a Healing Mystic or a Primus Fist or another 2-3 body like that. So already, in the worst case scenario, by playing Keeper of the Vale out onto the board, you've increased your board presence by 6 attack and 8 health, and it's done so over 2 bodies as well, so that it's more difficult to get removed. It's not going to be just taken away by one spell. I would say a good proportion of the time it respawns a Jaxi, which, as you know, Jaxi is in practically every deck as well, and is also really difficult to get rid of because it's a 2-2 that then spawns a 1-1. So with that, it creates obviously a conga line of already difficult to deal with minions and just makes it worse and worse and can snowball a game from there. Now these are the worst case scenarios. If we talk about the best case scenarios, the potential value from Keeper of the Vale is unlimited. I've had it spawn things like MacLeod Warbeast against me, I've had it spawn another Keeper of the Vale, so you're talking about 8-10 worth of stats, or potentially part of it has Rush and Frenzy as well, which is just really difficult to come back from if that is played against you on curve, or even later in the game. You're getting more value from playing Keeper of the Vale than you can even play in one turn outside of special modifiers like mana tiles or spell reductions or things like that. If you're playing against Keeper Lionar and it respawns, say, a Silverguard Protector or an Ironcliff Guardian, then the amount of statistics and presence that is put onto the board, and done so in a position where it is advantageous to the other player because they have chosen where it spawns as well, then I don't even know really how you manage to come back from that, aside from having the best hand you could possibly wish for. So I'm just going to draw a couple of comparisons to Hearthstone now for the people that have played that game. There are 2 cards that are often complained about in Hearthstone, and they are Dr. Boom and Piloted Shredder. Now, Piloted Shredder is very similar to Keeper of the Vale, or rather Reaper of the Nine Moons probably in this case, in that when you kill the Piloted Shredder, it then drops another minion of lower cost, and that minion is random. So a lot of people complain that this creates too much of an advantage because of the amount of value you can get out of that one minion, but it is limited to a low cost minion, and that low cost minion can also backfire spectacularly if you were to get a minion that clears your board or gives your opponent the spells you cast or something like that. So there is an element of risk, even though it is small, with playing Piloted Shredder, which isn't really apparent with Keeper of the Vale in Duelyst. The other card I talked about, Dr. Boom, was a legendary that was present in just about every deck since it came out, and I didn't really think about it in this way, though perhaps I should have, but it was brought up while I was streaming. Somebody asked me what would be the best legendary to craft, and I was talking about depending on which faction it is you want to play and which best plays into that, so things like Mask of Shadows for Songhai or Scion's Third Wish for Vitruvian. But then it kind of just popped into my head, as it probably should have originally, that Keeper of the Vale is kind of the Dr. Boom of Duelyst, in that there is almost no deck in which you wouldn't want to run Keeper of the Vale because of the sheer amount of value it gives you just by playing it. So in many ways, Keeper of the Vale is kind of a strange, unicorn-like love child of Dr. Boom and Piloted Shredder that I can't really work out why it's in the game or what kind of balance it brings to the table, because it's kind of objectively better than just about anything else you could possibly play in that slot. And I'm of the opinion that faction cards should generally be higher than neutral cards in terms of quality, and neutral cards should be brought in to either pad out your curve or to give you a bit of utility that you need, to say healing from Healing Mystics and Emerald Rejuvenators. And it shouldn't be that a neutral legendary is the card that almost all decks are building around in terms of getting as much value out of that as they possibly can. So in terms of changes that I think could be made to Keeper of the Vale to make it slightly more balanced, I think the stat line could be looked at, but I think the stat line is probably the lowest priority issue with Keeper of the Vale. A 4-5 is good, but it's not game-breakingly good by any stretch of the imagination. It's the additional value you gain from the opening Gambit that you have no way of really playing around unless the Keeper can only be played onto one spot that's otherwise surrounded by minions. And therein lies the main issue with this card. I think the ability for the player to control where the minion that is respawned is placed around the Keeper as well is another big problem with the card, as I say. The reason for this is that if you look at Zuriel, which is a comparable card, Zuriel the Life Giver, that is a minion which has the opening Gambit of it will respawn every minion of yours that died on your opponent's last turn, but it will respawn them in random places on the board, and so while potentially hugely valuable, the chances of all your minions spawning in a convenient place is very, very small. And you don't have that issue with Keeper because, as I say, you can choose exactly where that minion will go. So I think this is something that has to be looked at, and it should be changed to the minion either spawning on a random space around the Keeper or even a random space on the board. Another change we could possibly look at is, as I alluded to, similar to Piloted Shredder in Hearthstone, then the Keeper could have a limited value in terms of what it could resurrect. So it could maybe only resurrect something that costs 2 mana. This would make it very similar to that card, but it would still make it usable and perhaps even as oppressive as it still is, because Keeper resurrecting Ajaxi is bad enough on its own, so I'm not entirely sure that that's the answer we're looking for, but it would at least keep some kind of limit on terms of how out of control just spawning Keepers can get. My final change that I can think of is, a lot of people have said that Keeper of the Vale is a slow card. Obviously it doesn't do anything by itself on the turn that it's played unless it spawns a minion with an effect or with rush, and so if you play it on turn 5, that's what you can do. You put the Keeper onto the board, you put the other minion onto the board, and then if the other opponent has a way to kind of keep pressuring you or rush you down, then the Keeper doesn't answer that by itself. Now, I think maybe one way that we could further push Keeper of the Vale into a slower style of play is by making the Keeper not do anything on the turn it's played, and then spawn a minion perhaps every turn it's alive after that. So every time that the Keeper is active, like say at the start of your turn, it will spawn a minion on a tile around itself. Now this obviously has the potential to snowball a lot more than just spawning one minion has, but the caveat to that is that obviously it's very slow, it's silenceable, and it's removable straight away without it having an effect on the board, without you having any chance to answer that. And so I kind of think that these are the best ways to deal with Keeper of the Vale in its current iteration. I think the stats are okay. I just think it's the way the opening Gambit functions and the potentially limitless value that you can get out of it that are the bigger problems. And those are the issues that players bring up most of all. So as it stands, if you've got Spirit to spare and you don't have Keeper of the Vale, I would probably go ahead and craft it because it is massively valuable right now. But I do expect it is going to get looked at soon, and I do hope that Counterplay do have a look at it soon, because it is absolutely everywhere on the ladder at the moment, and I don't think one neutral card, especially a legendary, which is supposed to be rarer and perhaps more niche, should be in every deck and should be so widespread. So thanks very much for watching. I hope that wasn't too much of a rant. Please leave your comments below, and I'll be back tomorrow with another video.